The next segment is
we wanted to close this conference looking into the future, so we're going to see how our panel member is going to approach this topic. So I would like to ask Ximena Quintanilla, the head of study division of the Superintendency of Pensions in Chile, who's going to be the moderator of the panel, and also Diego Fernández, leader in data and impact product of IXPANTIA, Costa Rica. At the end of this panel session, we're going to have a Q&A. So again, you have to raise your hands, briefly identify yourselves, and there's going to be someone who's going to hand you over the microphone. Thank you very much. I know it's been a very long day. I would like to congratulate everyone who remains here, and I would also like to congratulate the organizers of this conference. Everything, it's been very well organized, and particularly we've respected the agenda. So I think that I also would like to congratulate ourselves, the moderators, and also the panel members, and the audience also. So I would like to introduce you to Diego Fernández. Diego is leader of IXPANTIA for product unit. He advises the decision-making based on data on business and public policies in Latin American countries. Diego is a he studies statistics, and he has a master in public policies with an emphasis on public policies and democratic governance from the University of Costa Rica. He has 15 years of professional experience in data analytics projects for the private sector, public institutions, and academic organizations. He has been a consultant for multiple national and international organizations, including the UNFPA, FES, UNICEF, Island People. Yeah. Recently, he advised the president of Costa Rica, working on data analysis for political decisions. Currently, he's responsible for leading teams in the design of data products that generate tangible impact on the strategic decision-making of leaders in organizations from different industries. He's a leader of the products and impact practice at IXPANTIA. A Latin American company specializes in data analytics and artificial intelligence. He has co-authored 2 books and several academic articles. He's a professor and a researcher. So after this amazing bio, I will give you Diego. For the good organization, so thank you for your effort. In my case, I'm going to talk to you about financial investments in the era of artificial intelligence. So Paulina said talking about the future, but I think that we're actually going to be talking about the present, which is what we're facing today. And I'm going to be doing this based on my experience through different organizations, not just in the pension industry, but also other industries where we've implemented analytics or data solutions or artificial intelligence solutions. So this is what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So I would like to ask you, who knows this place? Who can recognize this place? Yeah, I've heard you. That's correct. This is the Delphos Oracle, and it's considered the ceremonial center, the most important one for nearly 1,000 years. leaders of all sorts would come here to find answers if they had to make very important decisions, political decisions, war-related decisions, investment-related decisions, and they would ask the oracle about the future. I mean, the importance lies in the capacity to predict the future. Today we know that there was no such a capacity. However, it's very similar to what we see today when we talk about artificial intelligence, that we've given it mythical power that it doesn't have. However, it has great capabilities, but not in terms of knowing the future. So if we're going to be talking seriously about AI, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that it's not an oracle. It's science. It's science. It's the science that we've developed through human intelligence and technology of three different forces that have been developed, such as digitalization, accelerated digitalization, particularly during the last pandemic. We forgot about paper and we use computers more, but we've also accelerated the aspect of connectivity. Half of the population, 60% of them are connected to the internet, to the different social media, which creates a huge amount of data, something that we've never seen before. And we've never before had the capacity to store, process, and analyze data, this amount of data. We've never had such strong tools. So this is what we have today in terms of data use. And this applies to the investment fund industry. So what I've reviewed in terms of the penetration, we've seen that more than half is using today AI. This is a recent survey by Natixis that concludes that 54% of the investment fund selectors already use AI to support their analysis. The survey included 26 countries. Also, there was another survey in 2024 from Mercer that concludes that 24% of managers use AI and 37% are thinking about using it in their investment strategy. So generally speaking, more than half of the industry is already using it. And if you're not, this is the best time to start. You shouldn't be lagging behind. So if we want to get started, we face some challenges, such as the one you see in front of you, different tools, softwares, technologies, Python or ER or BI or Azure. So we start seeing different providers with different recommendations. So it's overwhelming. So we see a lot of organizations in this situation. So my first recommendation is don't start by focusing on the tools. That's not necessarily the first step. What we've seen is that what is necessary is to set a reference framework, a common reference framework. We need to understand the key concepts so that we're all speaking the same language, so that we have a common understanding about what's fundamental when it comes to AI. So that if someone asks where the left is or where the right is, I need to give a straight answer, because what we see is that they talk about AI, but they have different understandings about what it is. And there are a lot of other concepts that are also quite complicated in terms of machine learning, for instance, or deep learning, or different algorithms, or big data, etc. So first we need to set the basis of a common understanding. That's the first step. And this is what my proposal is. Now, that's the core of AI. So we need to build an equation that considers the essential, the main elements of AI. And the first thing is X, the group of data. That's how we should get started, and that determines the scope and the limits of what you can do based on this group of data. And that group of data can be data that are being stored for many years in the organizations that have made a great effort to keep them in servers. Or could be the Excel spreadsheets, for instance, that you have. Because data have characteristics, they have sizes, they may be fast, they are updated fast, sometimes not all of them are numbers, for instance. They could be a huge volume of text from books, social media, articles. It could be news, images, or videos, sounds. So that's the set of data. And that determines what we can do with them. And within them there is a knowledge, a value. So in order to extract that value, we need to apply a function, a statistical function, mathematical function. These functions have been developed over time. I mean, we're talking about random forest or regression models, for instance. So I'm talking about different techniques, natural language processing, for instance, any function that learns from that set of data. And this is very important to extract the knowledge that the human brain sometimes cannot process. They cannot find these patterns or trends that you can see in a set of data. So by applying that function or that applying, I mean, this is a method. That what leads to what we call AI. So that it's the result of applying a method or statistics to a certain set of data. So AI, it's also a generalization, because there may be different tasks. So it could be a prediction of a future value, for instance, or we could predict the value based on certain variables, or it could be a classification, for instance. Whether something is fraud or not, we can classify the different members that we have. So we were talking about 30 million members, for instance. So we can classify them in groups, for instance. Or maybe we could create text or images. And we've seen this in relation to ChatGPT or similar tools, these generation algorithms. And in general, here we see a tension. I mean, what would happen if we show this equation as a graph? So this is how an AI algorithm works. So we have historical data. You add a method that learns from certain hidden patterns, and then we create an algorithm or a model. And that model can be deployed or could be sent by email. It's a file. The model is actually a file that already includes the learning from the historical data, so you can run new data on them. And that new data is going to create a result, and that result is what typically creates value to the business. So there's where we can see the connection between the AI algorithm and this value to the business. And there are a lot of examples in the industry, and that's where you see a tension. For instance, when it comes to the classification, you can see the detection of anomalies in financial transactions to prevent fraud. That will be the value to the business. So through millions of transactions, you can detect an atypical behavior with high probabilities of being fraud. So this is an example of classification. Another algorithm type would be generation. For instance, using a chatbot when it comes to productivity, for instance, to replace what we do by using a call center, for instance. So they can learn pre-identified answers to certain questions. So you can have a conversation that seems human, like through natural language, or it could even be a prediction, to predict the value of a portfolio for the next 6 months for a given industry, based on certain criteria. So these are just examples, or typical examples, about the use of algorithms related to classification, generation, or prediction to create a value for the business based on AI. So the part of the equation, this is the part of the equation that we hear, and that's what that people sell to us, but it's not complete. So I would like to talk about the other elements that are key, and normally we disregard them. And I would like to start with error, statistical error, the error that can be measured. So starting from training or from that data, we can evaluate the capacity to perform certain tasks, either a prediction or a classification. And it's going to tell us that there is a margin of error that can be measured. And we need to measure that, we need to communicate it to decide whether it's acceptable or not. Sometimes what we do is that in the process of implementing AI algorithms, there is a moment, a meeting that we call the alternative meeting. So we do the analysis, we see the capacity of learning from data, we see the capacity of performing attacks, and based on the margin of error, we communicate that and we ask our client whether they accept that for us to implement the algorithm or not. Maybe the other alternative is that we need more data, or that we need a different use for that data, or it may not be acceptable, of course. So we need to monitor that error as well, because that error may change in the future. It may increase, for instance, or if we disaggregate data, we need to monitor that, because an error that we see today, in a few months, it could be a different error, the error could increase. So it's key to manage error. There are some cases when you do not consider the possibility of having an error when using the AI algorithms. An example of this, there are a lot of examples, of course, and I'm going to share this one with you about Air Canada. They use a chatbot to answer questions of clients, and there was a client that asked, what happens if a family member dies? And chatbot says, yes, we can reimburse the value of the ticket. So when there is a complaint and Air Canada says, look, here it's very clearly, this is our official document about this policy, and it says that there is no reimbursement in the case of that type of travels. They didn't want to assume responsibility for what the chat said, but after a discussion, a legal argument, they had to assume responsibility for this. They didn't want to deal with the statistical error they had. However, it was there, and it's part of the elements that you need to consider. So this is just one example of the implications of not considering an error, and it can also be very expensive if you don't consider the consequences of an error in the industry of pension funds. So here it's the equation. We have the function, statistical method, a mathematical method that is applied to a set of groups with certain characteristics, plus a measure error. But still, it's not complete. There is an element missing, and this is a black swan. Have you seen this? Have you heard about this? We need to consider the impact of what is highly unlikely, of rare events that we cannot predict, but impacts that are very dramatic. And afterwards you can hear about some explanations that you may have been able to predict it. So this is what Nassim Nicholas proposes with this concept of black swan, the black swan. So there are events such as the COVID pandemic, the Brexit, the global financial crisis from 2008, or the September 11 attacks. So these are unpredictable events, and the impact they have on the use of algorithms that learn from the past is huge, because it doesn't allow them to learn from the environment, that it's different. They didn't have the capacity to learn, so we should consider them as a key part of the equation, because they have an impact, even if they are highly unpredictable. So this is a statistical method applied to a set of data plus a measurable error plus the impact of highly unpredictable events are the ones that create a task or an action related to prediction, classification of generation, which is what we call AI. So these are the key elements to build this framework, this common framework. So these are the basic elements. So what do we do with them? How do we implement them? What does it mean for our organizations? So first we need to manage risks. And how? If it's the function of X, first we need quality data, because they determine the scope of the use of AI based on the quality of data, the quality, the characteristics, the speed, how complete the data is. And normally there is when we see a lot of challenges for the organizations. We want to have a good model. We think we have the data, and then they share data and we start detecting errors, so we need to clean the data. And it's difficult to find data with quality. Now, another consideration is the issue of the pre-trained algorithms. Algorithms that are offered to us, and they say that the algorithms already went through a learning process, and that they're going to see the results related to AI. But you have to consider the context when this algorithm learns. Sometimes not in alignment with the characteristics of an organization, with some exceptions. In the case of natural processing language, I would say that they are an exception, because the higher the volume of text they process, a better capacity they have to create the result, which is what we see in ChatGPT. But if we are using them to make decisions in terms of classification, prediction, and generation, with their own data, these pre-trained models are not necessarily a good recommendation. Now, there's also been discussions about the black boxes, and in that case we need to be careful. Sometimes we are proposed with models and we are not very clear about the methodology of the data, so they show us a result, and that result normally is we are depending on those models. So in those cases, a recommendation is to work on internal development, to invest and develop your own algorithms based on your own context and your own organization.
What have we seen in the industry? This is a survey by Mercer, the organizations that are implementing that 50% of AI is precisely quality challenges in the data, interoperability and access or data integration. That is in the X set, and we haven't yet described the method. And if we analyze the type of developments in terms of AI, for that half that is using AI, is only 50% are internal developments. The other half are using AI, but usually these are those alternatives that we have on the web, open source or in the cloud, that do not necessarily entail the use of internal data and internal or in-house development. The second aspect is error in the equation, and the key is about managing risks, because that has a competitive advantage attached. Understanding that possibility of anticipating the implications of the risk and knowing that there are different types of risks. Let me give you an example. In terms of fraudulent transactions, there's the risk of saying that a transaction is fraudulent and stopping it when it is not, and creating an impact on the user that was doing it, or not identifying an openly fraudulent transaction, let it go. These are the two risks. Those two risks create totally different impacts, which is the one that we want to minimize because you cannot do both simultaneously. So, understanding the different types of risks and how to manage them really leads to those advantages in the organization. So, it has to be a core topic in discussing the use of AI tools. And what to do with the black swan? What can we do with those highly unpredictable events with a significant impact? First, to have a plan B. Having a plan B because we need to understand that things may change and we need to adopt a different path. But that also entails a certain degree of understanding, human understanding. Although algorithms are an interpretation of a phenomenon, but that interpretation is limited. And sometimes we focus on the algorithm and not on the phenomenon that it represents. What we need to do is to focus on the phenomenon and how the algorithm is reacting to that phenomenon. And as humans, we have the chance of going beyond the algorithm, looking at qualitative, or maybe not quantitative patterns, or something that happened, or maybe anticipating the effects, either political or others. We look at the war in Afghanistan. Understanding that black swan events may be positive or negative. For example, what we see in companies in the technology industry, what they had a positive black swan because of the COVID impact, because of the digitization. Many of them reaped the benefits. That's why I said they're not necessarily negative. How to manage that? What have we seen in the industry? In terms of the relationship between data and humans, close to 10% is the measure of process automation in some cases, but more than half of the teams that are implementing AI, they are mostly implementing it to report the analysis, but it's mostly used by humans. And this is the concept of augmented intelligence, which is about understanding that humans and machines have strengths and weaknesses that are differentiated. We usually complement each other thanks to that. Just as we may understand millions of hidden patterns in our data, sometimes the algorithm doesn't have the experience or the expertise of looking at some qualitative aspects on the events, or a conversation that I held with somebody in the street that gave me some information, but it's not in the model. So, creating that integration, that human integration or integration between data intelligence and human intelligence to make smart decisions. It's not either or, but they are complementary. Finally, in terms of the outcomes of AI, one needs to manage expectations, what is really possible using an algorithm and what is not possible. Well, a typical situation is that we find organizations saying that they need an AI model to do this and this and that. No, they perform very specific tasks and they are very efficient. Usually, one needs to think of orchestrating different algorithms, AI algorithms, to be a multitask effort, but we need to understand the true possibilities of an algorithm. The boundaries or limits to define what is success for me is to actually correctly classify the members in a certain level of precision being able to allocate differentiated strategies and to define the budget based on the expected success. What we have seen in the industry so far regarding investment, there's a huge expectation about the impact of AI on the industry. But close to 50% today don't have any budgets defined for AI. And those who have it is around 0.1 or 0.3%. So there's an imbalance between the expectations and what is being invested on this topic. I'm not saying that one needs to invest millions, because what I've seen is strategies of companies that have invested millions of dollars in data and analytics to feed AI, and they haven't been able to do it, and they have created a huge expense that is not commensurate with the return on that investment. And I've also seen organizations that with a few hundreds of thousands of dollars, they get a good first algorithm that they put into production that creates a result that is being implemented in their processes, and it adds value. So it doesn't necessarily rely on how much we need to invest, but we have to do it. Now, in terms of expectations, so what we have seen in the industry, especially in investment industry, it's a larger return in terms of productivity, lower in terms of economic gains that can be quantified. More and more is more about more efficient and productive, being more productive and efficient regarding the performance of the tasks. So this is how here we see we have the equation, the full equation, and how you can manage the risks associated to each one of those core elements in AI to leverage those opportunities. And in closing, I'd like to leave you with a thought regarding risks, because there are huge risks involved regarding the use of data analytics or artificial intelligence. I've seen them in organizations and how they may impact those kinds of initiatives and impact the people. I could summarize those into three categories. Three very specific and simple risks. Not using the data, that's a risk, and that's an actual risk that I've seen in many organizations that do have the data and they don't use them because of their culture, because they want to keep on making decisions based on what they know how to do. Data are a powerful tool. And also, hammer is powerful. With a hammer, you can build a home using a hammer. But with a hammer, you can harm people as well. So it is a very powerful tool. And there's also the risk of using data wrongly. So knowing that we are not defining here we're not discussing about the wrong use of data, the risk that is left is to use them wrongly. That is to say, not considering how to adequately use data, and in this, something fundamental. There are maybe two recommendations. First, the organizational context does matter. Algorithms are not in isolation. They rely on an organizational context so that they are really successful and so that they achieve the impact that is expected from them. That organizational context has been summarized in these four aspects that are integral to AI. We are talking about strategy. Organizational strategy needs to be aligned with the strategy. It needs to address the goals and the objectives, but that result needs to be connected with the ultimate goals and the strategy of the organization. That's budget allocation, etc. The issue of talent as well. People. Human talent, the different roles, they depend on the kinds of skills we have in the organization to really deploy and manage these tools, these AI algorithms, do we have the right talent to proceed to the use of AI capabilities? And if not, how can we develop it? The platform. That is what we use as a leader. Technology infrastructure, the science that we're using to develop artificial intelligence tools, or what software packages, or what methodologies can be used, and that's key for the proper development of AI. And finally, execution, that is to say, the operating model, the way in which the organization operates, how to how to incorporate AI in the existing processes, decision-making processes, business processes, operating processes, how we do things, so that they do achieve their impact. Those are the context elements that are key to really achieve success in the use of artificial intelligence. And in that, what we have seen in the industry is that in general terms, the majority of companies do not have it is an early stage of development. There are first or primary models. Having a robust artificial intelligence strategy should be a goal, but they don't necessarily need to have it in order to start developing these tools. I don't want to create that perspective because it is not the case. Of course, you need to follow suit with those that have done it and how they've applied it to the specific context in which you operate, the data you have. And according to the use, you build more knowledge in terms of how they can be used in the industry, and then formalize an artificial intelligence strategy. But the industry today is not at that level yet. The second one that I wanted to cover about the risks of doing it right is to understand and knowing that we are talking about managing valuable assets in the organization and considering data as one of the most valuable assets in the organization as well. So they need adequate management, and for that a data governance framework is needed, an adequate data governance framework, which is something that would actually be enough for a separate seminar, I guess. It's a key topic to consider when implementing artificial intelligence. In general terms, I would say it is a framework that is based on policies, regulations, and legislation. Legislation in the national context and also the application of institutional regulatory frameworks. It is a regulatory base that needs to be complied with. Then there are at least three elements that I consider key to integrate, which are people, processes, and technology. Usually there's no integration among these three. Sometimes when they try to sell a data governance solution, they can sell it, of course, but usually it's not that by buying a solution like that you're going to be able to control the data. You need more than technology. You need to consider the roles, responsibilities, and the people who are going to take those roles and responsibilities, and how those are able to define processes and how they have an impact on how data is being treated throughout the entire life cycle of the data, because there's a whole life cycle involved. That's the integration between or among people, processes, and technology in order to create a good data governance framework, to then having safe data, meeting all low regulatory standards and quality standards that do build trust. Data governance frameworks key to build trust among the different stakeholders that the data are being used correctly and that you have the right data and that the decisions that are based on those data are based on data that is reliable. So that is a key in the strategy for data governance. I want to close this presentation also discussing your role in the industry. And really, the best description is the role of an orchestra conductor. Although it's not someone who needs to be a virtuoso in the violin or any other instrument whatsoever, but it is the one who must orchestrate through leadership those different roles involving the different stakeholders in the organization, technical people, IT people, analytics people, how do I interact with other institutions, with the members themselves in the organization. It's an orchestration of different stakeholders in order to really build an environment in which the use of data and the development of AI and analytics can operate well together. The orchestra conductor does it for the audience, of course, because that's the show. But you, with your leadership, are doing it for the people, but for specific individuals, for the well-being of people, who are the ones you need to focus on in the use of these very powerful tools, so that you can achieve the positive impact you're looking for. And that is where your role is so important. Correctly using tools such as artificial intelligence tools. Please remember these final thoughts. One is the best time, if you haven't started, the best time to start is now. It is not an expectation that is going to be used, but artificial intelligence is being used already as we speak. Understanding that there are opportunities, huge opportunities, but there are also limits to AI, which is not an oracle, that it's not to tell the future. It comes from science that creates major progress, but it has limitations. Managing risk in the use of AI, those that are measurable, such as the error, the statistical error, as well as those that are non-measurable, such as the black swans. Managing both. The organizational context does matter. Understanding well what is the maturity level of the organization to develop AI in data science or analytics does have an impact on the end result. And supplementing that data intelligence, being able to process large volumes of information with human capacity. Also, in order to guide decision making for a positive impact on society, using leadership, orchestrating those different stakeholders for the best possible use. That is what we're looking for, a positive impact through the use of artificial intelligence in managing investments in society at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diego, for such a motivating presentation. I've learned a lot, so I hope the rest of you too. We have a few minutes for a few questions only. I actually have several questions. But I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions as well. Diego, what would you say is the main difference between making investments using AI in comparison to the traditional methods of investment? Thank you, Ximena, for your question. The main difference, if we focus on the equation, it's the way in which we are processing data and how they support the decisions. So what we have is a capacity to use methods that can process more data at a higher speed, variable data with different characteristics, to inform in a more accurate and timely way, to really support the investment decisions. Now, this also poses a challenge for the industry in terms of higher specialization, quantitative specialization. So it creates a demand for roles with higher quantitative skills to make the best of these tools. And it uses this context where we have more data with different characteristics from different systems and that change daily. So the radical change is the way of how we analyze data and the way they support the decision-making process. Now, a more specific question. In this AIOS context, because most of us work in the regulation sector here. So considering that AI is still a new aspect, what do you think are the main regulatory challenges in regards of AI when it comes to investments in aspects such as transparency, fairness, the market stability, equality, consumer protection? Because I would imagine that we still have some gaps in those regards, right? I think that there are challenges, even technical challenges. I mean, when we talk about transparency, for instance, we have the issue of algorithm transparency. So there are some algorithms that are not very transparent, perhaps, and they actually create some bias that affect certain groups because they learn from historical data that already have biases. For instance, when it comes to inequalities. So if historical data over which the algorithms are learning already include certain inequalities, they are going to perpetuate that inequalities, and they're going to do it in a very efficient way. I mean, it doesn't sound very nice, but algorithms don't have an ethical component, and that's also something important to consider. So we need to think how far we're going to be using these algorithms that don't have this ethical component. Now, those are technical challenges, but there are other challenges that I also think are key, which is that there is a huge disconnect between the different players related to regulation. So, between the technical or business world that is actually implementing AI solutions and the regulator, there is no connection. They don't talk to each other, and the regulator doesn't talk to other players, more political or legal players. So there is a disconnect. So what we have is that we have isolated visions. So what we need is to create instances such as this one, instances where we can talk to different sectors. And this is an invite so that each of you who represent different sectors to ask yourselves, what is the vision that we may not be considering? Is that of a technical view, a legal view, etc. Because it's through integration and the connection of the different sector, we are going to be able to have a a decision that is more adapted to the real needs of the system. Thank you, Diego, for your answers. And now we have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please raise your hand.
Written by AI, there's lots of climate science. I don't think risk in financial markets reflects the science. I want to accelerate activity. How would you begin to get me to think about using AI to produce something that accelerated change? I'm a pensions regulator for this question.
Sí, entendí bien.
I'm sorry, I don't think he was listening to the interpretation.
Es una pregunta difícil.
Quite a difficult question.
Lo primero que habría que
The first thing that
considerar,
we would have to
lo dije
consider
antes, es justamente el hecho
is
de
the fact that
que no hay consideraciones
there is no
éticas
ethical
en algoritmos de
considerations when
generación
it
como
comes
este
to the
del lenguaje de
algorithms,
procesamiento
such
natural.
as the one of natural
Entonces
processing.
no va a tomar una
So,
postura
You're not going to have a
eh,
stand.
ideológica, digamos, en
So
ese
there's not going
sentido.
to be
No
a
va a asumir
stand
una
in that regard. They're
responsabilidad
not going to assume
tampoco, como vimos con el
responsibility
ejemplo
as
de
in
Air
the
Canada.
case of the Air Canada
En caso-
example, in the case of a recommendation. And that is part of what I'm here to talk about in terms of what is the scope, but also what are the limits of that type of technologies. So the first thing I would say is that it's restricted, in terms of the answers. Now, number two is that what we are measuring matters. So what kind of data or indicators are we introducing for learning, either if it's through natural processing language or the indicators for any type of prediction algorithm or classification algorithm? So how we can introduce indicators or KPIs that can truly have an impact, a tangible impact, because what we measure, it's going to move us there, but sometimes the results, there are some secondary effects that we didn't plan. So we need to pay attention to the indicators that we want, and what are those that are not considered by the equation. And of course, we need to understand the limits of the equation. I think that would be the responsible way of using it. Okay, because of time, I'm going to close this panel session. I know that there are a lot of questions about this, but we still need to, we have some closing remarks by the superintendent. Thank you, Diego.